Hi, I'm Simone. I go by she, her.
It's Tasika, use she, they pronouns.
I'm Aiden, he, him.
And I'm Nomi, she, her, and we're Stan.
Yay! So today we're going to be talking about Grey Gardens, and this is a little spiel from IMDb. It's a 1975 US documentary. Meet a mother and daughter, high society dropouts, reclusive cousins of Jackie O, managing to thrive together amid the decay and disorder of their East Hampton, New York mansion, making for an eerily ramshackle echo of the American Camelot. So we're just going to talk about how we believe Grey Gardens is a Gothic documentary, because we believe that fiction is not what makes a Gothic what it is, and that the tropes already exist in the real world and are obviously depicted in this film. So to be specific, first we're going to talk about the physically how it looked Gothic. So the dark lighting of the house was something that I found really interesting, especially in the beginning of the movie, where you'll see little Edie walking out, and you get to see like how you just see the dark frames of the windows, and you just see all the light outside. I found that was something that was really telling from the very beginning, that something was horrifically off about their lifestyle.
Yeah, I thought also just the home itself, the fact that it's like really old and decaying, even like dirty, um, is a very Gothic trope. But also I think specifically in this movie, the home is also a symbol of the characters. It's representative of them being sort of remnants of the past, um, and in my opinion, depicted as past their prime, and only like holding a resemblance of what they once were, but no longer being it.
Yeah, I think that connection is definitely emphasized by the intro of all the newspapers, and then they go into that black and white shot showing the exact shot of the house. It's like they showed many houses in the area, and then they showed the Grey Gardens house, which completely completely juxtaposed. It's all overgrown and it's dark and gloomy. I think it really emphasizes that within the house too, how they start off the film with them looking at old photos. There's that portrait of Big Edie on the wall that they do a slow zoom of, and it has some dark kind of music, um, very ominous, which is a very Gothic trope.
I think that this whole thing about like looking into the past, I think the mirrors, while like in a Gothic documentary, Gothic genre might like represent, I don't know, like a ghostly realm, or like, they almost always represent like this sense of self. And I think the mirrors that like Edie uses, she's like looking back on herself, like wishing that she was looked how she used to look. And also just in general, the exaggeration of like mirror shots and something, it just like shows their like sort of deranged sense of self that they have. And I think that has a lot to do with like the mirrors. It's like them looking into the past. And I think there's just a whole, we can say more about how they're just stuck in the past, and how I think overall like film form represents that. Like, I guess I could go on and elaborate on that. Like, just the feeling of there's no progression. You're just like stuck in the same spot, and there's nothing we can do to sort of like relieve them. Like, the whole time, like, although you want them to get out of the house and get out of the situation, the whole time they aren't going to be. And yeah.
I think that's something that's really big that we necessarily don't think of. It's a it's a documentary that's set in one location, primarily inside a house. And I feel like usually that's very abnormal for a documentary. Usually there's not much info that could happen in one house. And I think that really helps to hinge the, for them. They talk a lot about the past because they're stuck in this house. There's not much else to talk about besides what has happened, what they can show for themselves besides this house, because the house isn't much to show for. So in a way, I feel like the direction of their compo only really had um, one way to go for them to reflect, especially presented by a camera crew that's meant to talk about their life.
Yeah, I think this also, the fact that it's all set in their house enhances obviously the idea of them being trapped. Big Edie in a more physical way, just because she's old and, is just constantly in her bed, and little Edie in, you know, a more psychological way, trapped to her mom in the house and tied down. Um, and I think obviously this is also a gothic trope of women being trapped in a house. And I think it's also, like, moving on to another point, it's also felt to me anti-feminist in a gothic way. Like, it's depicting women not necessarily only as in distress, but as delusional and like a little crazy. Um, yes, it's not fictional, but it's simply how they are. And I think, um, you know, like in contrast with most gothic films that aren't documentaries, there's no man who saves them at the end because this isn't fictional. So this is a more modern gothic, yet it's equally, to me, feels non-progressive, and non-feminist. I also think, like we talked about in class, no documentary is objective, and even though this movie feels completely observational, right? But it's leaving the like, it feels like it's leaving the audience room to feel the way that they want to. But I feel like simply by deciding to depict these two women, to make a movie about them, who are delusional, who are dirty physically, who are old and also past their prime, whose luck with men has been poor, like, what is it trying to say? I don't think it's objective in any way. I think it is pushing a message consciously, and I don't think how there's any room for interpretation here that this film is feminist. It feels like, I don't understand how people can watch this film and think it's empowering. I think it's incredibly exploitative of them, and also just anti-feminist in general.
Yeah, I mean, like, unfortunately, I think they know that people are drawn to things which are not like empowering. For some reason, we're drawn to the things that like represent what we don't want to be, because I think in some ways we know that part of us is that way and has the potential to be that way. And I think sort of like extreme situations like this are really a drawing to, or like intriguing to people, just the extreme of something of like what can happen. And I do think they exploit that. Yeah. And I think just like the overall, just knowing like, just again, that feeling of being stuck, like you're just aware that they have these repressed feelings that aren't fully to the surface, and how that can manifest in a real life situation. How, like, if you disregard, if you don't have a clear sense of self, like what can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that's like literally the definition of exploitation, taking something that people find appealing, um, but like as like a in like for watching as like a worst case scenario, like, oh my God, like, at least my life isn't like this. That's awful. That is, like, it feels disgusting to me, and I felt like disgusting watching the movie. um Not at first. At first I thought they were, their dynamic was like very amusing, and like they keep saying like really funny things, and you're sort of like laughing with them, but then, as it goes on, you're like, I'm not laughing with them, I'm laughing at them, at how delusional they are. And then you feel like, I felt like gross about it. Like, I felt like I was taking part in the exploitation just by watching the movie.
There's this moment where little Edie was talking about being an older woman without a spouse, and she herself was talking so negatively. She was like, "Oh," she said something like she would kill herself or something. Um, and she's like talking about it as though she's not in that situation. I think there's this general um, misogyny that's prevalent that the directors, I think it's subconscious just within this era. It's reflected internally from her as well as Big Edie. I feel like the directors themselves chose to include that. Um, Whether that was conscious or not, it was still chosen to be included, and they definitely didn't sway away from it. Um, they, I feel like some of their questions encouraged them to reflect and then fight internally. Like they asked Big Edie, "Did you expect Edith, or did you expect Edie might get married someday?" That was one of the few questions from the cameraman, and they chose to include that. It felt like the only thing that does is provoke more tension and reflecting and judgment onto themselves and between each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, definitely the questions that they ask provides insight to what the intention behind the film was. I don't know exactly. I mean, to me, that's more a blurry area. I'm not sure what they the directors intended, but for sure the fact that they were trying to sort of instigate the situation with those questions, sort of, you like they were aware of what they were, filming and the people.
Yeah, I totally agree with it being exploitative, but I actually found like I saw two different ways you could interpret this film. Like you could either see it as them living in delusion or living in acceptance. Because when I first watched this film, I thought that like in the very beginning, like the first maybe 30 minutes or so, I thought that Big Edie had just, accepted the life as it was. And little Edie was still like, still sad and still wanted to go see the world. But like Big Edie just accepted that this is how they're living and they're totally cool with it. And she was just owning it. But the more I watched it, the more I could see that it was delusion and they're being exploited, and it just felt really gross, as Nomi said. But I feel that that was maybe the director's intention to like give you two different perspectives on a situation and like how you could really relay that to your own life. Because, everybody lies to themselves about little things, but obviously they took that to the extreme here. So maybe it's something like that. But I definitely think they crossed some moral lines when they made this film. Yeah.
I actually disagree. I just because personally I don't see how there could possibly be another interpretation of the audience not looking down at these women and thinking I feel bad for them, and not just in an empathetic way, like, but literally like looking down at. There's just no way, like, and it's not like a question of like morality in the audience, because this is like the filmmaker's choice, like to depict them in this way. Um, so ultimately it's their morality that's, um but I think it's just so wrong. I think there's no way you would look at these women and think, oh, like it seems like they're just like really happy with where they are. They're not. And even if you thought that they were, like, it's still like they're living in this sort of like delusion. They're so detached, um both mentally, like they're just from reality, but also from other people. So I just don't think there's a way to sort of watch it and think, oh, like, they seem like they're doing really well. They're not. They're like objectively not.
Well, I feel like if you look at this from, I don't know, I grew up a pessimist. So I definitely always think that that life sucks. Like, I don't think that anymore, but I definitely always thought that life sucks. So when you look at it that way, some people, if you think of that as their only solution, only way to live, then they're kind of enjoying that lifestyle. Because if I were them, I would have killed myself. Like, to be 100% honest, living in a situation like that, I couldn't have done that. But they're doing it, laughing and singing. So if you look at it in that sense, like in a very, very, very one-dimensional sense, it seems good. But for the majority of it, if you look at it in literally in the sense of reality, yeah, it's really fucked up.
Honestly,
Yeah, and it's
really
oh,
kind of
sorry.
agree, because in a way, when I've heard this, that self-deception, when you self-deceive, you're happier, because you're not aware of the inner things that you're actually, struggling with. So whoa. I'm sorry. I think there's a sense of false acceptance with what they have, and in that they're happier. Um, and if they were to face what they actually were, because they're delusional, I think they're happy. I don't know. I think there is its double-sidedness to that. Yeah.
I really don't see what in the film made you think that they were like happy or like accepting of their situation? Because to me it seemed like they're constantly like bickering, being like, oh, I wish, like, I want to live in New York, I don't want to be living here with you anymore, and like I wish you'd gotten married, and like you're fat and ugly. It's like, what here is acceptance? They seem like so tense and unhappy with their situation.
I think there's also, within the fact that we're watching a film, they chose to include the interesting parts of them fighting. They didn't include the good parts of them probably just relaxing, eating, lying around watching The View, feeding the cats, playing with the cats. I remember in the end, little Edie said something about Big Edie, like, I hope she doesn't die. She's a lot of fun. Um, so like they still care about each other.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
obviously it feels like super unstable. They are not I do believe they're not happy with the situation, and there's like lots of tension, but there's yeah, I think they alternate between sort of modes of like acceptance and not no acceptance. Yeah, I think there's definitely a big part of that. Yeah.
I think something that plays into that is the relationship. I think we can talk about like the physical gothic tropes that we see within this. I think in some ways they kind of hold onto each other, keeping each other trapped away in the house. Like they play both roles in the gothic relationship, where they're trying to protect and keep the other one safe. Like little Edie says, she's had to look after you for 25 years. She has a deep responsibility for her mother, but she's also tied there. She wants to leave, and the mother, I assume, wants to be able to do more. She doesn't want to be trapped here.
I think their relationship is also heavily reliant on the savior male. Just everything, like the mother doesn't want Edie to um get married because she wants her to be in that house and not to leave her alone. And the mother, she sort of telling herself that she had this great marriage, but and like and she's sort of like okay with the fact that he left, and she stayed in this house and like had her was able to experience like her, I don't know, her career, I guess, but she didn't really actually. It was downfall. I don't know. Yeah.
Speaking about, I guess, kind of the men in their lives, I think Edie in some ways is the trope of the maid who's been around for little Edie is who's been around for a long time, who's seen all the past spouses and who has disdain for the new one. That's how her outlook was kind of towards Jerry, because she related him back to Tom Logan and Gould, saying, "Oh, Tom Logan was just there because I was taking care of everything. He just needed a place to stay." Saw these men as manipulative, and that Big Edie was just going along with it, and she's feels trapped because there's not much she can do against her mother's word, but she still views Jerry as a threat.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another thing really wanted to talk about was little Edie, like the way that she acts. Like she's very submissive to her mother and to everyone, because she's like damn near 50, I believe. And she's very much capable of being able to leave and get up by herself, but they feel chained down by each other. And I feel like that really mirrors the modern Gothic, like Nomi was saying, of the husband and the wife, of just the fact that they cannot let each other go, even though it's would probably be best for both of them. And I really feel like this this documentary, when it's being shot, is in the part of the relationship or the part of the arc of the trope where the house, like they're supposed to be running out of the burning house, like they're being poisoned, like, but they're not going to run out of the house. They're about to crumble with it. So I found that really interesting.
What you were saying kind of reminded me of the fact that like we didn't really see what they were in the past at all. It was all based on how they saw the past, like sort of what Aiden was saying before. And it's like they're like when you said like they're chaining each other down and stuff, and like she's capable to leave. It's like it makes me wonder what she was like actually, what Edie was like when she was away from the house. But we really get no sense of like, and was she a typical person then, like, or was she always delusional? Like, how, like, yeah, that's what I was wondering. And I think that's sort of the directors intentionally did that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because there's this huge, like with everything being a remnant of the past, I think there's also a huge sense of mystery like throughout the in the movie at certain points. Not throughout it all. But I think that's also obviously a very gothic trope. Even like between the both of them, you're constantly waiting for one of them to snap at the other one just because like it seems like there's something left unsaid. Yeah, which is yeah, very gothic trope.
I guess we could also talk about again like the portrait. I don't know if anybody mentioned that yet, but yeah, just like that's also just the exaggeration of the past and like what they are now and what they were before. Yeah.
I have a new kind of question um, about it being a Gothic documentary. How much of the Gothic genre presentation is based in the film form versus the content? Because I feel like the directors definitely have a play in that and they know what they're doing. But I also think a lot of the content skews that way, like so much of it. There was this one line that I felt like almost was out of place. Like it sounded like it came from Gaslight. The little Edie literally says, when she's talking about the house, I'm scared to death of the doors, locks, people roaming around in the background. Like, I feel like Paula literally says that in Gaslight. So I felt like I was taken out of it.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to your question is kind of like boring and expected, but I think it's totally like a combination of both. Um, I think form and content in a given genre are totally intertwined. Like, you know, the idea of the house itself being a remnant of the past and then it being like really old and dirty and having really like old furniture, you know, that's more physical, but then, you know, the content of the EDs being, you know, equally remnants of the past, that's all of those things sort of play into what makes this film gothic. Um, Also, by the way, I'm only now thinking of this, but I think it is also totally objectifying that they are both sort of treated and filmed as remnants of the past, the same way as the house, like what they're being compared to here. Like the symbol of them is the house, which is a physical object. But yeah.
That actually reminded me of how they play that balance between like it feeling like a gothic film and just a straight up documentary, because like for the majority of it, like Simone said, we're only told the history that they know. It's all from what they're saying. We're just listening to them talk, so we don't know what's true or not. But like there's shots in which it takes you out of it and shows you the reality of their situation, which I feel like if you're in that mindset that I was talking about earlier of pessimism, where it's like, oh, they're living happily, you get reminded they're absolutely not living happily. Like especially the scene in which little Edie goes up to the attic and is going to feed the raccoon. Like she's talking, but I literally could not hear her speak just because that shot was so strong of her standing in the middle of a dark, dingy, messed up attic with like crumbs and food all around her and pouring it all over the ground and talking about someone living up there because she saw a book. Like it was just shots like that. I feel like the directors chose to do that to remind you that like it's not okay if you did forget about, you know, feminism existing.
Yeah, I'm not sure really what like came first in terms of like film form and content, but I mean, they sort of, if they chose, let's say they chose to like film these people, I mean, I think just overall we can say that like the Gothic represents things which already exist, fears which already exist, and I so it's they just took advantage of that, and I think obviously to exaggerate the those things, the directors made choices to exaggerate the genre. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think definitely that exaggeration of the genre. It kind of reminds me of the Waldman reading from last week. How he talks about um people could relate to this Gothic genre, and it's grown because of how throughout the 20th century women were rejecting more domestic values, and I feel like this documentary in a way has a kind of anti-feminist perspective where it's like these women rejected um, traditional values. They don't have husbands, and look how they turned out. It seems inherently negative, just presenting it on its own.
I think this is all interesting. Not it is all fascinating within the context of of gay camp. Which it's sort of like why, like it's sort of a contradiction. Why would something anti-feminist or like predicting or like showing women that view themselves in a anti-feminist way be appealing? And I think in some ways it's one like non-conformist. It's not like what women were doing at the time. Like these are just like they're completely differently acting, and they're also super eccentric. Um, and I
But are they eccentric or are they just like delusional?
well,
And
I
like,
you could say those are the same thing in some ways, or like I mean, eccentric. You like
Eccentric is a positive way of putting it.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you could say. I don't know if maybe delusional, but just a certain way of portraying yourself, which is not typical. So, um, and like they're, I think Edie is like super feminine, like overly makes herself look feminine, I guess you could say. Yeah. And her clothing is very unique and stuff. Um, but I think that's something, an interesting contradiction to talk about, that we could talk about, like why something anti, so like showing women in this way would be appealing to the queer community.
I
Yeah.
find it, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I also just kept thinking about that because I can't, like I said earlier, I can't even imagine how someone would watch this film and think it's feminist or empowering in any way. Like I just can't see it. Maybe there's like some key thing that I'm missing, but I just can't see it. And then I was thinking about it, and I think that the fact that the two filmmakers, um, who actually filmed and were there with them, the fact that they were both gay men is, even if you didn't know that fact, I think you would probably be able to figure it out on your own if you really tried to analyze it. I think the two women are depicted in a way that women would never be able to depict other women in this way. I also think straight men would just like, that's like a totally unrelated, like that would just, they would never have anything to do with these two women. But I think maybe that's what makes it. Maybe this film is viewing two very specific people um, in a way, maybe it's relatable, maybe, I don't know, but I think it is through a perspective that is specific. And if it were not two gay men making this movie, I think it would be very different, or it wouldn't be made at all.
I totally agree with that. I was actually thinking when Simone was talking, it reminded me of like this movie, enjoying it in like a campy way reminds me of how I enjoy Christmas. Because, you know, if you think about Christmas itself, like commercialized Christmas, it's like a demon holiday. Like the fact that it was made by like people that have murdered so many people and destroyed so many cultures and just spread disease like crazy. Like it has so many bad and so much negative energy with it. But if you look at that surface level and that surface level only, you could be like, ooh, bright colors and presents. So I definitely get that in this film, that when I first looked at it, I said, because of the way the camera looks also, I was like, ooh, bright colors. And these girls are like smiling a lot. They're singing like, ooh, look at them moving around and all that action. But when you look deeper, like Nomi was saying, you see all how like really tragic it is. So yeah, I just wanted to make that comparison.
I was thinking like that, like Nomi said, it could maybe even be relatable. I mean, I think it may be in a place of like where you're always reminded of your past and how you're in your downfall. It's sort of like a place of oppression, like by yourself, like you're like oppressing yourself. And I think in a way to oh my gosh. And I think that like finding yourself in a place of oppression could possibly be related to the experience of gay people. I mean, they express themselves in such an eccentric, like, I guess, way. So I was just, yeah, I think it could be related to that.
I think maybe if we consider it as, I agree with mostly about a negative perspective from this documentary, but I think if we consider that maybe the intent wasn't malice, we consider more relatability of how both of these characters themselves feel relatable, of a mother who just wants to kind of be a good mother, but she necessarily wasn't. So she's trying to convince herself that she was, and she can't do any more in her state. She is only she's left in her bed all day to reflect and look back upon her life. That's all she can do. So I guess the aspect of delusion is warranted for her. Like, there's not much she can do. Her daughter still has to look after her. And the daughter herself, that's a very relatable feeling of having wasted your life and wanting to do more. I feel like the Gothic itself reflects that, being trapped in a house, wanting to do more. So in a way, it's a realist version of that, where we can relate. Maybe that's why it has this I don't know, cultural impact.
I think it's important to not disconnect ourselves too much from the situation. I think we have to try to see ourselves like in those people. And I think there's, certain fears that like we all have. And yeah, we can argue whether or not it's exploitative, but yeah, I think it's important not to disconnect yourself and be like, whoa, these people are so like different and disgusting and like blah blah. Yeah.
I don't think that it like that's not the the problem isn't with the Eddies. It's the fact that they chose to make a movie about them, and that doesn't like what else other than like depicting them in this kind of really gross way is the movie trying to do? What message is like what else? How else could you interpret this? I truly struggle to understand how else this could be interpreted that is not incredibly misogynistic. I don't know.
So that was Stan talking about Grey Gardens. Thank you for viewing. Bye.
Oh, wait, do we have to do something funny?
That's all, folks.